I'm waiting. Okay, aquaculture. Now, here's something that is practiced quite a bit here in Korea, and there's a lot of advantages and some disadvantages to it. So let's just take a look at it. Okay, so what is aquaculture? Aquaculture is essentially farming in the sea. What you're doing is instead of going out and looking for wild fish or shellfish or whatever, instead you're going to raise them in a confined environment in the ocean. You're going to set up uh, cages or some sort of containers in the water, and you're just going to feed and raise whatever product you want. So it could be salmon, it could be tilapia, it could be shrimp, it could be oysters, whatever. So basically, you're farming in the sea in confined pens that you float in the water. Now, there's definitely quite a few advantages to aquaculture, and we'll just go through this quickly. Okay, the first one is uh, for people who do wild fish fishing, and my son was involved in a factory ship that did this. Um, you might have seasons where you hardly catch any fish, and so it's an unreliable source of income. You can invest a lot of time and energy and money trying to find fish and not find them. So it's reliable in that sense. You don't have to worry about a low catch season. The other thing is you don't have to worry about bycatch. You know, one of the great tragedies of wild fishing that happens is how nets tend to catch things they don't intend to catch, as do long lines. And some of these are things that we really care about, like dolphins and turtles. Doesn't happen with the aquaculture systems. Another one is you don't have to worry about depleting fisheries in most cases. So you don't have to worry about am I taking more than the ocean is producing because you're producing them right on hand. You know how many are being produced, and you're not wasting fuel looking for fish. That you know where you know where the fish are. They're right offshore. It doesn't take you any time to get to them, so you're saving a lot of fuel when you do that. And basically, it's efficient both in terms of time, money, fuel. Is like you know where the fish are. They're easy to get to. They're easy to harvest. So it's a very efficient, economically advantageous way of uh, generating profitable uh, fisheries out of the ocean. But there's some disadvantages. And that's why it's covered in this course. Okay, so one of the main ones is that when you go to feed these fish, some of the food falls down to the bottom. The fish eat, and then they excrete waste material, which falls down the bottom. Well, this waste material has a lot of nutrients in it, and one thing we see is when you have a lot of nutrients, you're going to get eutrophication. Basically, what that means is these wastes are going to lead to algae blooms. These algae blooms are going to end up with dead algae, and these dead algae are going to get consumed by bacteria, and that's going to drop the dissolved oxygen in the area, and that can have some considerably negative consequences on the wild fish species that happen to be living in the same body of water where you're trying to do your fish raising operation. Another one is that sometimes they escape. So if you look back here, they show like this. Sometimes fish escape from these pens. Okay, and the thing is, if you're raising a fish that lives in the local waters and they escape, well, lucky them. They're just join the wild population of local. But if you're raising something that doesn't belong there, which often happens, oh, it can be a bad thing. It's something we haven't talked about yet this year. But you can end up what's called an invasive species. So basically, when you introduce a species into an environment where it is going to be successful because it has a food source that it can access. So there's things there that it likes to eat, and it doesn't have any natural predators, and it can outcompete the other fish in the area or other species in the area that are competing for that resource. You know what? It's going to grow its biotic potential, and you can end up with just so many of them. And so here's a classic case. All right. So I'm going to show you a video of this. You won't believe this video if you haven't seen it yet. Okay. So basically, various species of Asian carp were imported. Vietnamese aquacultural farmers in the United States were raising catfish, freshwater fish, to sell as it's a popular thing to eat in the United States. It's a very popular freshwater fish, and they're like, "Well, we'll raise some aquaculture. We'll have these basins we build near the Mississippi River. We'll get our water from the river." Well, the problem is you said, you have all this fish waste, leads to all this algae, and that algae then can be a problem for your fish, right? Because you can get eutrophication of your own aquaculture pond. So they imported these carp, and this carp, what you see, if you go on the river trails here in our area, I'm sure you've probably walked along river paths. I do it all the time, and you see these fish. They're I can't. They're basically they're the size of your arm. Okay, you see them all the time. These are carp. And basically, what they mostly eat is algae that grows on rocks. All right. And so these farmers, these fish farmers, are like, hey, look, what a great solution. I'm raising catfish. The catfish are eating the algae. Algae ends up with eutrophication, which kills my fish. So I'll just bring in the carp. The carp will eat the algae. It's all good. And it was all good until there was a large rain event and flooding occurred. And these carp got out of these pens and into the Mississippi River. And this happened in the 1990s, and they have just been exploding in population all along. And they have now literally taken over almost the entirety of the Mississippi uh, um, basin. So this huge watershed that basically goes from like it's more than half of America, right? And the headwaters of it are the Great Lakes, which have their own very profitable fishing industries. And these carp are just destroying the fisheries. They're outcompeting all the wild fish species in the Mississippi River, and they're almost getting to the Great Lakes now. So just take a look at this. You're not going to believe this. Okay, so oh no, where's this video? Here it is. Okay, all right, ready? Okay, let's see if I can get to play here. It's in slow motion, but it should be a beautiful thing here. Okay, pardon it while okay, here you go. They jump. Those are some big fish. And unfortunately, one thing about them is
silver carp were accidentally introduced into
people
these
don't like to eat
waters
them.
after escaping from a fish farm.
I just want you to see a little bit more of this. You guys are having some people ride their boats past them.
They have some truly bizarre behavior. Some can clear 3 meters in a single leap.
It's beautiful photography. Here you go.
The secret of this extraordinary behavior lies in the boat's motors. The fish mistake pressure waves from the propeller for the movement of predators and literally jump with fright.
People have been killed.
They react in alarm to
Yeah. Okay. So let's see if we go to the next. Let's see. Now I got. Okay. Here. So if you haven't seen that, now you've seen that. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm smiling, but it's terrifying because they've taken over this entire watershed, basically. Another thing that happens is when these fish escape. All right. So we often find when we're raising things, be they plants or animals, that we tend to have very low biodiversity. These animals are not ones that have a genetic background when it comes to animals, where they've had to survive. They've been cared for. So they're not being genetically culled out if their genes are not making them particularly well equipped to survive in nature. And so when they get out and they reproduce, they have a tendency to dilute the wild stock, which is well adapted to its environment, with genetic material that makes the offspring less adapted to its environment. So we tend to find that there's a limitation of biodiversity that happens when you have these fish species introduced into the wild. Another thing that happens is when you put things in close proximity, they tend to make each other sick. So we tend to get a lot of parasitic diseases and bacterial diseases and viral diseases that get transmitted between these fish, and they're so closely packed in there. So we find that diseases, whether it be parasitic, bacterial, viral, are quite common in these aquacultural environments. And because the water flows freely in and out of it, it has to. Uh, then uh, these viruses and bacteria and parasites get out into the environment, and then they affect the wild species that are sharing the same water with the fish that are being raised in an aquaculture environment. Now, another thing that happens is uh, just like with what happened with the with meat production, when you have a lot of animals close together and you know they're going to get sick, and if they get sick, you're going to lose everything. Your answer is I'm going to give them antibiotics. So just like with these feedlots for cows and pigs, it's basically the same thing for fish. They give them antibiotics. Well, so what happens is just like with the cows, you get antibiotic resistant genes that then get out into nature. So basically, the wild species that live there also end up getting sick because they're getting diseases that are adapted to surviving. They're just more aggressive bacteria and viruses. Um, and also the antibiotics themselves get out into the water, into the environment. As does the feed, and basically the outflow from this contains food waste, bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics and antibiotics. And so the outflow from these farms is something that really concerns a lot of people. So it's definitely one of probably the major disadvantage of aquaculture. And there's one last one that's worth noting. Okay, and if you spend any time around me, you know how much I love Korea. But when you go to the southern part of Korea, you'll notice there's a lot of aquaculture. And me personally, I mean, I get it. It's better. I don't want to have the oceans overfished. I don't, and I like to eat fish too. Right, my wife and eat a lot of it. But there's definitely a diminishment of cultural ecosystem service. When you see a coastline that is, and Korea has some of the most beautiful coastline I've ever seen. But then you got all this stuff floating out there, and it kind of detracts from it. So I mean, you go on Google Earth, you just start, like my wife and I say, hey, let's figure out where we're going to go. We get on Google Earth, we look around, and when you zoom in, almost everywhere you look in the southern part of Korea, when you see this gorgeous, convoluted coastline with all these rocky outcrops, these bays are almost always filled with aquaculture operations. So there is a diminishment of that ecosystem service, that cultural ecosystem service that brings a lot of people to the water. Humans love to be on coastlines, and it does detract from it a little bit. So that's aquaculture. A little food for thought, no pun intended.